It's 8:30 on the Voice of Fairfield and Westchester Counties, 1490 WGCH, Greenwich, and WGCH.com anywhere. I'm Tony Savino. It is time for our Greenwich First Selectman debate between Republican incumbent First Selectman Peter Tesei and Democratic challenger Sandy Litvack. The little debate format before we get right to the debate. Opening statements will be 2 minutes in length. And the candidates have decided who's going to go first, and whoever delivers the opening statement second will have the closing statement first. And whoever has the second opening statement will get the first question. So we had a flip of the coin. Our own Jim Campbell was the referee, got it right actually, and Democratic candidate and challenger Sandy Litvack had the first. Will get the first opening statement. So, Mr. Litvack, you have 2 minutes. Go right ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you, and thanks to WGCH for hosting this. I think it's important to note kind of what's at stake here. I believe this is a pivotal election, an important time for Greenwich. And that's why I'm running, because I think the issues are matters which have to be addressed. The incumbent has been in place for 10 years. That's a long, long time. There are things which have arisen and which have to be attended to and which aren't. I would identify 3 major issues that I intend to address, that I'll talk about today, and that I will deal with as First Selectman. They are in no particular order. First, the question of charter change, which I think is critical. The First Selectman has supported a proposed charter change to our Board of Education. For reasons that I'll explain as we go along, I think that is a total mistake, and I vigorously would oppose any such change. Secondly, something I've talked about throughout, the need for economic development. Our town has issues, our state has issues, and the state's issues impact us if we don't put ourselves together. We need to have an economic development plan. After 10 years, we do not have one. We have no method or basis to attract new businesses, which we must do. And thirdly, and importantly, what I bring, because this is what I did at Disney, I brought in new businesses, I attracted new businesses, I had an economic development plan, and thirdly, as I said, what I did at Disney was I learned and I knew how to manage and organize. We need that. There are issues at Town Hall that aren't being addressed, whether it's the parking services division, whether it's the absence of a traffic planner, whether it's the empty stores on the avenue, whether it's the backcountry. All these issues need to be addressed. It's time for a change.
Thanks very much, Mr. Litvack. And Mr. Tesei, 2 minutes.
Good morning, Tony, and good morning, listeners of Greenwich. Thank you, Mr. Litvack, for joining me today. Serving as First Selectman of Greenwich has been an incredibly rewarding experience. As a fifth-generation Greenwich resident with children now the 6, I take great pride in the town we live in and the wonderful quality of life that we enjoy. Under my leadership, we continue to support essential services that make Greenwich such a special place to live, work, and raise a family. We have outstanding first responders, as evidenced by SafeWise ranking us as the #1 safest community to raise a child in America. We have the highest quality educational opportunities, a balanced approach to investment in our public infrastructure, using prudent, responsible, and effective methods of financing. We have excellent services for the most vulnerable of our residents and our increasing and active senior residents. As part of our overall legacy and stewardship of the environment, we are continuing our work to make Greenwich a more sustainable and resilient community. All of this was validated in the 2016 Greenwich Resident Satisfaction Survey. Working within town government and successfully engaging the wonderful organizations that partner with us in these endeavors has been a hallmark of my administration. I truly value volunteerism. Working with the BET, RTM, and Board of Ed, and all our appointing authorities, my priority has been to maintain our solid financial standing during difficult economic times without sacrificing important infrastructure and service needs. Despite losing nearly all of our state aid, the 2017-18 budget had the lowest tax increase in decades. This was also noted by BET member Leslie Moriarty. She says, your budget started with a well-crafted presentation in February. It was clear that you and Ben work hard to balance the competing objectives as you put your budget proposal together. So I ask for your support for 2 more years as we continue to keep Greenwich a treasured place to live.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tesei, and you will get the first question. You'll get 2 minutes to respond. Mr. Litvack will get 1 minute to to respond and rebut, and then Mr. Tesei will have 1 minute. That's how we'll go along. So the first question for Mr. Tesei: the Republican Town Committee took the step of not nominating incumbents on the Board of Education and the Board of Estimate and Taxation, including a former first selectman who was chairman of the Budget Committee. In your opinion, is this good for politics in Greenwich and good for the education in Greenwich? 2 minutes.
Well, the RTC is an elected body of about 60 people. They're chosen at caucuses in January of even-numbered years, as is the DTC. I am not a voting member of the RTC, have not been one since I became a member of the BET back in 1998. I do think people enter into politics. They choose to compete. The competition reaped the candidates that we have. As you know, I was very supportive of Mrs. Tarkington's desire to petition. I believe in the right of petition onto the ballot. I also signed Mr. Bernstein's petition because, again, I believe in choice. So in terms of the decisions that were made, I come back to the fact that some of the most important elections are held every January of even-numbered years when the two political parties constitute their makeup. Those are the folks who are choosing who will serve us. As we look to the Democratic side, we have two candidates for the Board of Ed who are only vetted by 60 to 70 people versus now the Republicans that are going to be vetted by the entire electorate. So I think there should be greater incentivization to have more candidates.
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute to respond.
Yes, the key here is why were these people not renominated? Because that tells you a big story. Peter Bernstein was not renominated because he opposed charter change. As the mayor, the first selectman, I call him mayor, but the first selectman seeks a charter change, Peter Bernstein opposed it, as do I. Therefore, the Republicans turned on him, which was their right to do, but interfering with his petition was not their right to do. Jim Lash was dropped. There's probably been no better first selectman in the town in the past 20 years than Jim Lash, and yet they dropped him. Why did they drop him? Because he cut the budget of the tax collector, which should have been cut. So the reasons why they're dropping these good people are pertinent, and I don't get it.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei, 1 minute.
Well, again, the folks who ran for the BET had the right to primary. It required they devote their time and attention to go out and get the petition signatures, as Mrs. Tarkington did. I went out with her to do that because I believed in her, and I would have gone out with Mr. Lash and Mr. Norton, for that matter, had they chosen to do so. But again, it requires a will and a determination to be in the process.
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Next question is for Mr. Litvack. You'll have 2 minutes, and Mr. Tesei a minute to respond and you to rebut. The question for you, Mr. Litvack, is throughout the campaign and in yesterday's debate, in fact, Selectman Drew Marzullo, a fellow Democrat, has talked of the collegial relationship with other members of the Board of Selectmen. What will your style be if elected to the board?
Well, I think I'm pretty collegial. I've made a career of being collegial. I was at the Department of Justice. I've been at two major law firms. I was the Walt Disney Company. I think people will tell you that I am pretty collegial. But I am a leader. I don't sit back. I don't have no opinions on things. I listen, I get the facts, and I lead. But I lead collegially. You cannot run the Walt Disney Company without being collegial. You cannot run the Department of Justice Antitrust Division without being able to work with people. So the answer is, this is something I've done. This is something I will do. But it will not be passive. I intend to point us in the right direction. I intend to lead collegially in the right direction.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei.
Yes, I think civility is an underpinning of any organization. I have championed that prior to it being fashionable in the political realm. The relationship on the board is collegial, and I think it set the tone for politics not only in Greenwich, but should be the standard at the state and nationally. Mr. Marzullo, to his credit, is very strident and very pointed in his opinions and his views, and we respect him for that, just like he respects us. I think respect is all too often lacking in society, and should I be reelected and serve with Mr. Litvack, I hope we will develop the same collegial relationship and respectful relationship that I've enjoyed with Mr. Marzullo, Mr. Toner, Mr. Crumbine, and all the folks who have served during my time.
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute.
civilly and cordially, as well as whomever the third selectman is. But civility is key. I'll probably talk more about that during the day, because I think we're lacking civility and we're heading in the wrong direction in Greenwich, and that really is an issue. So I'm glad to hear Mr. Tesei talk about it. It's critical as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. You're listening to a Greenwich First Selectman debate between Republican incumbent First Selectman Peter Tesei and Democratic challenger Sandy Litvack on 1490 WGCH, WGCH.com, anywhere. I'm Tony Savino. Next question is for Mr. Tesei. This is about, it was touched upon in the opening statements about the economic plan, marketing program. Mr. Litvack has called it a marketing plan. That the town needs an economic plan. Mr. Tesei, your thoughts about his comments about that and the plans for economic development in the town?
Certainly. Well, I'm certainly happy to advise Mr. Litvack on what has been our economic development plan. You know, he's lived in town 11 years. There's been 5 municipal elections, and he's only voted in one of them. So clearly he hasn't been paying attention to what's been going on and how we've developed such a successful track record. It begins by having strong financial management that was recognized by Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch for addressing all of the retirement liabilities, keeping down fixed costs, managing fixed costs, and having stability in our tax rate. That is what has attracted people here. We tie that to sensible zoning practices that protect our neighborhoods that people enjoy coming to. We invest in public infrastructure, as we did at Glenville School and Hamilton Avenue School. And I was a champion to rebuild Glenville School when Mr. Last decided not to. He pulled the money out of the budget. When I was chairman of the BET, Mr. Litvack, I put it in because I believe in education, public education, neighborhood schools, and also those amenities that people come to enjoy, our parks and beaches. We have wonderful public-private partnerships run by volunteers that I cherish, not criticize. And I think the marketing campaign is a way to bring us above all the negativity that's been created by the Democratic leadership in Hartford. You cannot open the paper any day without having negative headlines about the instability, the mismanagement, the issues with the Lottery Commission, whatever it is. It's all been negative, and we need to rise above it. We have a great story to tell. We have an excellent track record, and it's all tied to our economic development plan that we've had for several years as a foundation of our governance.
Thank you, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute.
Yeah, the key there is no economic plan. There is no economic development plan. What you heard Mr. Tesei talk about is not an economic development plan. I know about economic development plans. That's what we had at Disney. That's how we brought people into the park. This is not a marketing issue. Disney is the best marketer in the world. I know about marketing. This is not a public relations issue. This is not about what you did 10 years ago. This is about what are you going to do tomorrow. Planning is talking about the future. Mr. Tesei wants to talk about the past. He's had 10 years to talk about the past. I want to talk about the next 2 years. I want to talk about developing a plan and what I'm going to do, what I know how to do, what I have done to get this town moving. And there's no point in sitting and talking about Hartford. The point is, we're in Greenwich. How are we going to deal with it? And the way we're going to deal with it in my administration is have a real economic development plan.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei, 1 minute.
I would love to hear about the plan. As far as I'm concerned, it's like pixie dust. It's just kind of thrown out there. I have a plan. Well, let's talk about your plan. I think in order to have a plan, you have to understand what you're planning for and with, and that's the town. And again, my opponent has not been engaged in the town at all. Misvoting in 4 out of 5 elections and has not shown up at any organization that I can find contributing his time and talent. So how do you plan for something you don't know about? It's not the Magic Kingdom, as I said at the debate. It's the municipality of 62,000 people with a very diverse population and strong civic engagement.
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Next question is for Mr. Litvack and on this economic plan, economic development. But there's also been a lot of people that have expressed some nervousness about town because Greenwich has a large hedge fund industry, which, because of taxes in the state and so forth, they can just leave. All you need is a laptop to do a hedge fund, and if they leave, that hurts Greenwich. What are your thoughts about that and along the lines of an economic plan for the town? 2 minutes.
Yes, let me address that. The first thing I want to say, though, just to follow up on something Mr. Tesei said, remember, Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. It wouldn't be bad to have Greenwich be the happiest place on earth. That's what I know how to do, and that's what the economic development plan is. When you want to know what is the plan, it's very simple. We can't rely on the hedge funds for the reasons you just stated, Tony. We have to bring in new kinds of businesses, tech businesses, media businesses, animation businesses. How do you do that? It's very simple. You know how to do it. You put together a plan which does a variety of things. The first thing you do is you assess your competitive position in the state of Connecticut, in New York, and around the area. You find out where you stand, what your strengths are, what your liabilities are. Secondly, you target the particular industries in question. Thirdly, you know what those industries are looking for, and you make sure that you can satisfy those needs. If you can attract those kinds of business, you're also attracting young people in town, and that's part of what this town needs. And finally, just to make one point, you don't have to attend every town meeting. You don't have to vote in every election, although I didn't, and that was a mistake, for which I've owned up, because Donald Trump woke me up. I'm not going to have that happen again. But you do have to get involved. You do have to know how to do these things, and you don't learn that sitting in the town of Greenwich for 10 years. You learn that by being out in the world.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei, 1 minute to respond.
Again, we are very actively engaged with communities in China. We're talking financial tech. We're bringing folks over regularly. We are actually going on Thursday into New York as part of the Fairfield County 5 to showcase the attributes of Greenwich on prospective firms and individuals. So we're very much doing the things that Mr. Litvack talks about, and I'm very proud of the group that we've assembled to do it.
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute to rebut.
Yeah, it's nice that they're finally going into New York. It's been 10 years. The problem is here. You don't wait till the house is on fire. There's smoke. It's time to act. This is something I know how to do. You can criticize me for not voting in municipal elections. I criticize me. You can say I haven't been on boards. You're right. I didn't come here to be a politician. I had no intention of running for office or being a politician. But when Donald Trump was elected and when I saw the problems in this town, I decided to act.
Thanks very much, Mr. Litvack. Next question for Mr. Tesei, and it concerns charter change. Some have called it a power grab by Republicans for the Board of Education. Tell us the thought process behind it. Defend that from that standpoint.
Certainly. So as you know, citizens petitioned the Board of Selectmen to take up the issue of charter change related to how the Board of Ed is elected. It is not a true election in the sense where the majority who win the votes take the seats, as it is in many communities. Unfortunately, in Connecticut, we don't have the ability to elect nonpartisan boards of education. It would require a state statute. But the fact is, when people petition their government to take up an issue for discussion, and it centers upon civic engagement, I'm going to hear it, and I'm going to listen to it, and I'm going to foster a dialogue about it. Right now, the issue before the town is not even so much the composition, it is whether or not any change should go to the voters through referendum, as it presently is required for changes to the RTM, the BET, and the Selectmen. I think that's a great idea. I think any time that the citizens and the broadest number of people get to decide things for their community, it's essential. Democracy works if it's given a chance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute.
With all due respect, I think Mr. Tesei dances around the issue. This is a political power grab. This is an effort to stick politics into the Board of Education. It is a mistake. It is wrong. I do not understand how anyone supports it. Now, when Mr. Tesei says, well, I just am having it stand up, be a leader. Are you for it or are you against it? I am unalterably against it. I believe Mr. Tesei is for it. If he is, he should say so. If he's against it, just join me and say, I, too, am against it.
Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei, 1 minute.
I am for choice. Choice. It's part of the democratic process. It breeds accountability. We have a board that oversees one of the most important functions of the town, educating our young children. I have 2 in the system. I'm very vested in making sure that we have stability. We've not had stability at the board, not only on the Board of Education, but in the superintendent's office. And I think anything that can bring forth people of caliber and skill who are vetted by the electorate at large will ideally produce a stronger board and greater stability in the superintendent's office, which we've not had.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, you get the next question. I think it's going to be our last one. Then we'll get to closing statements. And it has to do with Selectman Drew Marzullo, his arrest on shoplifting charges. The Democratic Party basically disavowed him. What is his status with you as a member of the ticket, or is there a status with you? 2 minutes.
Well, it's kind of hard to answer. I guess there is no status with me except to say that I joined, not officially, but I joined with the Democratic Town Committee in unendorsing and unembracing Mr. Marzullo. I've told him privately, I've said it publicly. In my judgment, he should have stepped down. He made a mistake. He has a problem. He should address his problem. You cannot have someone in a public office who has integrity questions. Stealing is an integrity issue. There are other kinds of crimes and offenses which are not integrity issues. This is one. I don't understand how he or how the voters can want someone in office, despite the fact that he's done a good job over the years. The fact is he has an issue. We should be responsive to the issue. He should have stepped down. They could not. The Democratic Town Committee could not force him to step down. He chose not to. That was his choice. I do not embrace him as a running mate. On the other hand, if the town decides that he should be elected and I'm first selectman, I will work with Drew just like I would work with Mr. Tesei or Mr. Toner if that turned out to be the case.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Litvack. Mr. Tesei, 1 minute.
Clearly, what Mr. Marzullo did was wrong. He's acknowledged it was wrong. All of us in our lives make mistakes. He's owned up to his. He's paying a price for it in the court of public opinion. But ultimately, the voters will decide his fate in the type of people they want representing them through the elective process. You know, I would like to ask Mr. Litvack, given his affiliation with the Disney company at a time when Harvey Weinstein was at Miramax, a subsidiary of Disney, and Mr. Weinstein was sexually exploiting, attacking women, as general counsel, did you, at a minimum, draft any agreements approving millions of dollars in settlements with victims? Because Mr. Marzullo's actions may be bad, but this is truly heinous. And I think it's important, since we don't know a lot about Mr. Litvack, that he come clean and tell us what was his role. Was there any involvement by his office as legal counsel?
Thanks, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 1 minute.
Sure, I'll jump in here. While I talked about my cordial way of working with people, probably one of the only people I never could get along with was Harvey Weinstein. If you were to call Harvey Weinstein up now and mention my name, you'd get a very bad reaction. No, I didn't draft any settlements for Mr. Weinstein. No, I had nothing to do with Harvey Weinstein. And by the way, holding Drew Marzullo up to Harvey Weinstein and suggesting that therefore he ought to be a selectman really is silly, as far as I am concerned. That's a pretty low bar. I'm not going to defend Harvey Weinstein. I had fights with Harvey Weinstein every day I was there. Harvey Weinstein is not running. Drew Marzullo is running. You and your Republican colleagues have embraced Drew Marzullo. Drew may be a nice guy. He didn't just make a mistake. He has a problem. He cannot be trusted to be on the board.
Thanks very much, Mr. Litvack. And we're going to get now to closing statements. And again, each candidate will have 2 minutes to talk. And we're going to start with Mr. Tesei. Go ahead, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Tony. As first selectman, I'm proud of Greenwich's enviable standing as a premier residential community that people chose to live, work, and raise their families. We have the highest quality educational opportunities, a balanced approach to investment in our public infrastructure, excellent services for the most vulnerable of our residents and our increasing and active senior residents. As part of our overall legacy and stewardship of the environment, we are continuing our work to make Greenwich a more sustainable and resilient community. All of this was validated in our 2016 Resident Satisfaction Survey. Working within town government and successfully engaging the wonderful organizations that partner with us in these endeavors truly has been a hallmark of my administration and one that I'm proud of. The true Greenwich spirit is embodied by so many caring volunteers that has allowed us to care for all our residents while keeping taxpayer costs low. I've worked with the BET, Board of Ed, and RTM to maintain our solid financial standing without sacrificing important infrastructure and service needs. When you think about your choices for this election and the quality of person you want leading Greenwich, I share the following April 2015 testimonial from my friend Rabbi Yossi Darren upon my receiving the UGA Greenwich's recognition for community service. Quote, Peter Tesei is one of those unique and beloved individuals who has many hundreds of people believing that he's their closest friend in town. And he really is. Peter does not view his position as first selectman of Greenwich as a career, but rather as a sacred stewardship, wherein he feels personally invested in the material welfare of all the citizens of this lovely town. His record speaks for itself." End quote. I ask for your support on Tuesday, November 7th, to continue to serve this beloved town as your chief elected official. Putting the interests of Greenwich first remains my focus each and every day, and will continue to for the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Tesei. Mr. Litvack, 2 minutes.
Well, that was basically the same closing that Mr. Tesei made at Round Hollow. It is the politician's answer. Let me give you what I think is the real answer. We have problems. We have empty stores on Greenwich Avenue. We have traffic that won't quit if you sit on Putnam Avenue for an hour, you know about it. We have houses in the back country that aren't selling, and real estate is going down. We have no economic development plan. Those are the real issues. I want to talk about two more in my closing. One is the charter change, which the first selectman said is about choice. It is not about choice. It is about sticking politics into education. We have a bipartisan board. We've had it for 80 years. It works. They now have this idea of all of a sudden making it a political football. That is a clear mistake. That is a binary choice. You vote for me if you want to keep politics out of the Board of Education. You vote for Mr. Tesei if you want politics in the Board of Education. Finally, something that Mr. Tesei touched upon earlier that I want to touch upon, and that is civility and tone. The civility in this town is starting to deteriorate. When someone can advise people not to vote for women for the RTM because they are like banshees, he says, and no one stands up in city government and says that's unacceptable. When no one stands up and says what the president says is unacceptable, that's a lack of leadership. I will provide that leadership. That leadership sets the tone in this town. The tone has to be one of civility. We don't say women can't sit on the RTM. We don't chide people who are trying to get petitions signed. We don't do those things. Donald Trump does those things, and our leaders have remained silent. I will not remain silent.
Mr. Litvack, thanks very much. Mr. Tesei, Mr. Litvack, thanks very much for participating in today's debate. And I want to thank also Selectman Marzullo and Selectman Toner for yesterday's debate. Election Day, 1 day from today. Polls are open from 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. Please get out and vote, and we'll have full coverage 8 o'clock next Tuesday night on election night. I'm Tony Savino. Thanks for joining us on our first Selectman debate here on 14.